Welcome to Exchange Traded People. I'm your host, Michael Reardon, and today's guest is Bill Mann, Chief Investment Strategist at the Motley Fool Asset Management. Bill, welcome to the show.
Hey, Michael, how you doing?
Good. So, Bill, I like to kind of split these conversations up into two parts. First part is all about Bill, the individual, and then the second part is about, what's going on in the industry and your observations as you see things today. So diving straight in to get to know the man behind the Motley Fool. When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
So when I was a kid, I was always interested in maps. I loved maps. I loved geography. And so naturally, I wanted to go into something that had me traveling and going overseas. So I focused at a very young age in joining the State Department and becoming a diplomat for the United States. As it turns out, and I went to college at American University in Washington, D.C., and I was in the School of International Service. I had a whole plan in place. I was a German and a Japanese major. I studied Russian as well. And then I met a girl who was going to go to law school, and she said, basically, I'm not coming to Malawi with you or wherever it is. So I chose her. That was that. It turned out to be a good choice. We will have been married 30 years this year.
Wow.
And she actually works at the State Department. So I got my wish in a very roundabout way. So we are a State Department family, but I went into finance instead.
It's always a girl, isn't it? Always a girl.
This time it paid off.
This time, yeah. I remember another guest I had on this podcast, and they had the same thing. They wanted to be a diplomat as well, and I actually think they kind of met it. But they were saying to me that, like, a career in diplomacy, it's incredibly difficult to get into it, isn't it? Like, the bar is really, really high. Like,
Yeah.
Regardless of which government you're talking about, it's like it's not an easy thing to do, is it?
No, and it's not just about being smart, right? So I had studied, and I knew diplomacy. I had studied peace and conflict resolution, and all of these pertinent courses as I was going through my studies. But there's also just a personal comportment part of being a diplomat, and maybe I would have made it. Maybe I would have washed out. My wife thinks that I'm not enough of a rule follower, that it was going to be difficult for me to make it.
Stay on course. Yeah.
You know those moments when you say, "Well, let me tell you what I think." I think I might have caused an international incident or two.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I would have been an horrendous diplomat. I would have put my foot in it way too many times. So, all right.
Yeah,
So
these are super talented, super dedicated people. The people who go and they make relatively little money, and they dedicate their lives to living in places all around the world. Some places you wouldn't want to go to, and so it's a really noble career, to go into the federal service in that way.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. All right, so that didn't happen, but you did get into finance. How did you get into finance, and basically, how did you get into the seat where you are today?
So I got into finance, as you're probably gathering, a little bit of a circuitous route. One of the things that I did do in university is I did study accounting as well. I took accounting, so I had the basis of the language of business to go along with the other languages that I learned. My first job out of school was with the Japanese Ministry of International Trade and Industry, and I was learning regulatory work. It was interesting work, but it really wasn't all that exciting for me. And so I ended up, in a roundabout way, co-founding a telecommunications company as the regulatory person. I had that regulatory framework, and that telecom company, this was the mid-90s when telecom was the hot industry, and we were little. We were working in the garden spots of the world. I'd be in Pakistan, I'd be in Nigeria, I'd be in China. We had the first international telecom license in China and Indonesia. Oh. But we were also getting business plans from other companies. And on my desk, and again, we were little, I had business plans from people who were going to capture, total about 170% of the total market. So I had to learn I guess you would call it mergers and acquisitions, but had to learn business analysis in a very quick, very real way. And so that's how I started to make that transition. I saw the writing on the wall in telecom. And when I was in India one time, I picked up a copy of two books. One was Robert Hagstrom's Warren Buffett Way, and the other was William O'Neill's How to Make Money in Stocks. And I realized at that moment that there were many different ways that I could, express my interest in business.
Yeah.
And joined the Motley Fool in 1999 as a result of that.
Wow. And it's been happiness ever since.
Well, it was certainly happy in 1999 when you joined, and it was in the middle of the .com bubble, and you could write about any company that ended in .com, goats.com, bedsheets.com, and it would, the company would skyrocket. I was more interested in that time because, as I said, I was learning everything I could about Warren Buffett. I was really, really interested in companies that were actually already making money, and the companies that people were leaving at the side of the road, companies that we were in like the aggregates business or the drywall business or the paint business. And so I came with a very interesting mix of ideas. One, that you really wanted companies that were growing, but two, that you really wanted to find companies that had sustainable business advantages. And in the .com space, I just didn't see too much of that. So I would write articles that, 7 people would read because, I'm writing about companies that did not end in .com. But
and would you like back then, 1999, would you have described yourself as being a journalist or a financial analyst, or?
We were always in a kind of an interesting seam. I think ultimately we were journalists at that point because we weren't managing money, and we were simply we had our own money, which we would make decisions in the public view. So maybe we were applied opinion columnists in a way. There was some journalism. We didn't go about doing too much in the way of hard investigative reporting for the simple fact that we were consider ourselves investors writing for other investors. So what we were trying to do was learn along with our audience. And that, although there was definitely some looking into, the accounting of businesses and asking questions, we didn't try to become gotcha journalists or anything of that nature.
Yeah. So how did the transition into managing money come about?
So as I said, I started in 1999, and that was .com. In 2002, well, really starting in 2000, but through 2002, everybody who had invested in .com companies lost almost all of their money. And what I noticed at that point, Michael, was that a lot of people didn't realize the risks that they were taking, that they did not, when your own capacity to withstand risk in some ways is path dependent. Like if you've been making money or you've been getting away with whatever decision making that you've been doing, you're going to think that that's, that you have a much higher capacity to suffer loss than you probably actually do when loss comes about. So we saw a lot of people in that period of time get really hurt. And so the co-founders and I and other people at the Motley Fool started talking about, okay, we are investors who are writing for other investors, but maybe the next time around we should also give them a little bit of a safety net. Let's give them a way that they can put money into something where we are not going to panic on their behalf. So in 2008, oddly enough, we launched Motley Fool Asset Management. I was the founding chief investing officer, and that was in the midst of the great crisis, the financial crash that really took everything down. So we launched at a really, really interesting time. I would say ultimately about 6 months too late, but we were in process. We were trying to get there, but So that was the baptism by fire for me and for the Motley Fool and Motley Fool Asset Management, launching and beginning to manage other people's money.
Got it. And when did you kind of first come across the world of ETFs?
When we started, we have always been of the opinion that most investors should at least keep some of their money in index funds, right? There are plenty out there. That has been a way to keep people really from hurting themselves. It's something we've talked about for a long time. So obviously, when we started, SPY already existed. It had come to be there. So we were very fond of this model. Now, of course, in 2008 and 2009, when we launched, there was really no such thing as an active ETF. Everything in the space was passive. And by this time, iShares had come out, and so they had every country under in the planet that had a market you could buy ETF shares in, but they were all some form of passive model. So when we launched with three fairly, to call them traditional mutual funds, it does a little bit of violence to the term traditional, because there's nothing about what the Motley Fool does that's strictly traditional. We have a point of view about how best to invest, but in terms of the wrapper itself, they were actively managed mutual funds.
Gotcha. Interesting. All right. So, clearly you've been like in the industry for a long time. Like you've been around the block a few times as well.
You're just saying that because of my gray hair. Stop it.
It's your youthful looks. What, like, when you kind of sit here now talking to me, and you think back of your career to date, like what are the kind of the learnings that you kind of take from it, and what advice would you give your younger self now if you met him?
So oddly enough, I think one thing that really served me well was the fact that I studied history. I think I think that one of the things that you see, and Dalbar does this research, and there are a bunch of different places that do the research, that there is so much need or desire to react to the current thing. And so when I was 27 and first even thinking about stocks, that's what I thought would be smart. When in actuality, Dalbar research will show that the average, the average investor in mutual funds in the U.S. Has wildly underperformed the very same mutual funds that they have bought. So very, very early on, I came to realize that there was a real value to simplicity, to not overreacting. But it takes a while. I mean, again, sometimes I feel like when I'm talking about this, I make it seem like we were robots in 2008 and 2009, and the rest of the world is panicking and, we were just fine. No, we were freaked out. It was just a matter of how you properly process and react to that emotion, right? It's not about being emotion free. It's a matter of putting those emotions into context, and it takes a really long time. And I don't think there are too many 20-year-olds that you could tell that to and they'd be like, oh, got it, right?
I think you kind of have to live through it, right?
You really do. And no 25-year-old wants to hear that. Right? They're smart. I mean, they've just finished their Series 7, and they've just finished undergrad, and they've got all the book learning. But it really is it is a lifetime of learning how to be intelligent about your emotions.
Nicely put. All right, when like kind of turning a bit towards the industry now, so you've seen like a number of cycles in the industry. So when you kind of observe like where we are today, like across asset management and then specifically into ETFs, what are your general observations about the market?
So two big ones. So as I said, when we launched, the thought of actively managed ETFs was somewhat absurd, and we tend to think of actively managed ETFs competing with passively managed ETFs, but what in actuality, actively managed ETFs are replacing the traditional mutual fund, and there are a lot of reasons why it is a much more positive experience for investors to be in ETFs versus a traditional open-ended mutual fund.
Yeah.
So that to me has been the real, the thing that started, it's like English ivy. It slept and then crept and then it leapt. I mean, you don't really hear too much anymore about new open-ended mutual fund launches. There are there's the old guard that's out there. That's what's been competed away, and I think that is very much a positive for investors and a positive for the industry itself.
Yeah. Do you can you see like a world where the mutual fund wrapper no longer exists, or is there always going to be a place for it?
I think the mutual fund wrapper is probably going to fade away, in the same way that other instruments that we've had in the past have faded away. You can look in the U.S., like pensions have somewhat faded away. They were replaced by defined benefit was replaced with defined contribution plans. Does that mean that they've disappeared? No, because there are certain components of how people exist that is going to make that wrapper a much more beneficial one. I don't think that they're going to go away, but I don't think that you're going to see too much in the way of new open-ended mutual fund launches, if for nothing else, because the ability to launch an ETF is manifold easier and cheaper, and the maintenance is cheaper for the advisors. And so I don't know about you, but I completely believe in the power of self-interest, and the self-interest alone will be a default towards the ETF. And then if there is a very specific case where that other wrapper would be more beneficial, maybe they would go that way.
Yeah. Just going back to the point about like active ETFs, like the thing that I don't know if I either laugh or scratch my head, or probably a bit of both, but like the ETF industry has spent like basically the last 25 years just slapping down active management, saying you can't outperform the market, stick with passive, like active is bad. And now all of a sudden, like active ETFs are the golden child. So how do you kind of reconcile that message?
Well, I mean, on some levels, the passive ETFs and the passive industry. Is there a passive industry? Let's call it the passive industry. Has always been able to point to the statistics that show that very few active strategies beat their benchmarks. Right, and that's a fact. It's probably a fairly inconvenient fact for the active industry, and so you could look at that and describe the active industry as being a manifestation of the endless power of hope. But I think that there's something more than that, and we'll talk a little bit about where I see some opportunity. But if you think about what the active industry is, it is a way for every investor to manifest their own investing strategy in some way, right? Like, yes, you could wake up in the morning, and Warren Buffett said this, you could go buy the index fund, you could buy the S&P 500, and you're done. And that is fine. It turns out that there are a lot of people for whom the S&P 500 by itself does not give them enough volatility for their appetite. And there are people for whom it's way too much, right? So when you think about what the active industry is, it's a way that allows people to express their point of views. And I don't think that I would ever put a bear market into human capacity to express views. And so that's why I think that the active ETF industry, having become credible is now the bigger game in town in terms of launches.
Yeah, fair point. From the Motley Fool's kind of point of view, like what kind of products are your clients basically expressing the most interest in these days? Is it active ETFs or others?
Yeah, it is. It's primarily active, and we have currently 3 passive ETFs and 3 active ones. Now, if you ask me, as a term of art, that's exactly what they are, but I tend to think of them as being more, particularly in the way that we trade, because we are a very low turnover shop, even with our active funds.
Right.
So when people talk about passive versus active, I think that there's a little bit of a misconception in that, in those definitions. A passively managed ETF or a passively managed instrument is based on something, and that something, there's not an S&P 500 tree that grows S&P 500 fruit. They are all hypothecated by somebody, right? Yeah. So the only thing that's different to me between active and passive is what are you going up against and how do you trade, right? So in our world, I tend to think of it as a continuum. So like our passive funds, and the largest of which is our flagship TMFC, it's based on an index that was developed and is proprietary to our sister company, the Motley Fool. Now, to me, when I talk about an index, that is something that is, that's just a simple truth, right? Here are the outputs from that index. But in the, at the same time, that index is being based off of knowledge that comes from somewhere and performance that comes from somewhere. So I think that we are going to see, especially in the world of AI, I think that we're going to see kind of a blending of the two, where you go from ones that are simply rules-based to ones that have a little bit more flexibility. And I don't really know what the words are for those, but I think that's what's coming. So I actually said a lot of things that didn't actually answer your question. The question that you asked is what people are looking for. I think that they are looking primarily for a performance that matches their own psychological capacity to, to match, volatility. So we're recording right now in mid-May. We've just gone through a very exciting April here in the United States and the market, and so suddenly people were interested in much more ex-US, and they were interested in much more volatility dampening instruments than they were in the months prior to that.
Yeah, you mentioned AI there. Do you think that like AI is like you as an individual who kind of manages portfolios? You think AI is going to have a profound impact in terms of how you do your job over the coming years?
I think it will. The question that I have ultimately is what type of edge AI gives people. Because if you think about what AI is, it's a common pool of knowledge, right? Yeah. So if you say, how's AI going to impact your business? If I ask the same queries as everybody else, I'm going to get the exact same inputs as everybody else. So I think that how AI is going to be implemented comes in those queries, which, by the way, is a very active process, right? Yeah. The output might be passive. The process itself is incredibly active. It is something that it is something that will, I think, in some ways, shorten people's time that is required to get to know a company. And I think one of the more interesting applications of AI really may come down to, okay, I, investment manager or investor, have found this company. AI, how do I go about finding companies that are similar to this under these different of focus, like shortening the funnel, if you will. I think that's going to be a very powerful job that AI is going to play.
Yes, definitely. What future plans do the Motley Fool have for the ETF space?
So if you look at the Motley Fool's current products, I would describe them all as being some version of growth funds. And again, you probably picked this up by now. I'm not a huge fan of nomenclature because I don't really think of us as being a growth company, although it manifests that way, because when people talk about growth versus value, it's basically based on some statistical inference, like what's the PE, everything below X is value and everything above X is growth. As long-term business-focused investors, we do tend to invest in companies that have higher multiples than most value companies. I think in the future you will see us looking to get more across that scope, across that spectrum, using the proprietary knowledge that almost 30 years of more than 30 years of the Motley Fool has built up. So I think that in the long term, we are trying to be more things to our current investor group, who
Right.
Again, relearning the lesson that maybe we learned in April. A lot of times, people tend to react very very quickly when risk environments change, and
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a powerful thing for us to be to have products that allow different risk expressions.
Yeah. Okay. Where do you see the industry in the next 5 years?
Well, there are two elements of the industry, and again, I've talked a lot about I've talked a lot about its ability to allow people to express their own risk, and
Yeah.
I'm really excited for for products like our TMFE is the Motley Fool's best 100 companies, but it's done on a lower a volatility dampening way and on a capital efficiency way, and so basically how that has manifested itself is that the top end of the of returns is limited somewhat, but it doesn't react as as violently even as the S&P 500 to these exogenous events, to risk factors. I think you're going to see a lot more power coming from the ETF industry being able to fine tune to helping people get into portfolios that that match their own psychological makeup, if you will. I almost said psychological breakdown. That's an entirely different thing. The other part of the ETF industry is, and this has been true for a while, is that because ETFs are very easy to launch, you have seen very much fashionable ETFs come out.
Yeah.
Anytime there's something that people are interested in, boom, there's an ETF that tracks. I understand why you would want to appeal to people's baser instincts. I'm not quite sure what the benefit of that is to the investors writ large. If you do believe that investors have, by virtue of their own choices, generally underperformed what they might have done if they made fewer choices.
Absolutely. All right, cool. Last question for me. If you weren't doing what you do now, then what would you do?
So I have, as I mentioned at the outset, I did, I've always been fascinated by maps. I've been fascinated by geography. I've been very blessed to travel a lot of places, and I was also blessed with kind of an encyclopedic capacity to memorize things. So I really do believe, if I'm interested, if I'm not interested, it'll just bounce off my skull and it's gone. But I actually think that if I could get away with it, I would be a travel blogger, right? Like, nice. People come up to me and they say, "Hey, Bill, I'm going to Taipei. Where should I go eat?" I'm like, "Okay, here are the 5 places you should go."
Yeah, nice.
I think I'd be pretty good at that. And I don't know where the money is in that. I think it's one of those very classic hockey stick kind of payoff. So where there's a lot of people trying to do it and making very little, and then a few people who are making a lot. But
yeah.
that would be a dream job for me.
Yeah, it's a good one. I like that one. It's a good one. Should don't give up on that. You never know. Bill, this was an absolute pleasure. Really, really good talking to you. I enjoyed that very much. So thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Michael. It was great speaking with you as well.